Hello, I'm Michael Topham, technical writer for digital photo, and welcome to this second masterclass video lesson, which is going to explore Photoshop's lens blur filter and see how we can use it even more creatively. In the first video, we took a good look around the different controls inside the lens blur filter before using it successfully to create a shallow depth of field effect in a landscape image. In this video, we're going to move on and go one step further. Instead of using selections to tell the lens blur filter the areas of the image that we'd like to blur, we're going to use a depth map to create a miniature effect that is similar to that of using an expensive and specialised tilt and shift lens at its widest aperture. For those who are unfamiliar with a depth map, it's a special channel that we can create to tell the lens blur filter which areas of the image we want to keep in focus and which areas of the image we want to be out of focus. The best thing about using a depth map is that they allow us to graduate the blur effect with fantastic control, and they can be adjusted very easily as they work in a similar way to that of layer masks. So let's get stuck into this technique then and see how we can transform the start image eastcoasttrain.jpg into what will seem like a miniature train scene with some careful work with a depth map and the valuable lens blur filter. Once you've gone into the Start Images folder on the CD and located the file eastcoasttrain.jpg, just load this up into Photoshop, and then just make sure you can see both your layers and your channels palette clearly on your screen. And if you can't, just go up to Window in the menu bar and make sure you've got a tick alongside channels, and make sure you've got a tick alongside layers. First of all, we need to create a duplicate layer to add the lens blur effect onto. So just go up to Layer in the menu bar and then down to Duplicate Layer. Just rename this duplicate layer Lens Blur and then just hit OK. We now need to create our new channel which will form our depth map. So go into your Channels palette and then move over towards the right hand side and click on your Channels palette menu before selecting New Channel. Highlight the name and give this channel a new name, and I'm going to call it Focus Point, before moving down and making sure the colour indicates is set to masked areas, the colour is set to red, and the opacity is set to 50%. Then I'm just going to hit OK. Now I'm just going to move my channels palette over towards the right hand side so it's neatly positioned out of the way. Make sure that your focus point channel is actually selected, and then just move over towards the left very slightly and make sure that the channel visibility is turned on, and you'll be able to see how the original image is now showing through red. To keep the plane of focus in line with our train at a diagonal angle and to graduate the blur, we're going to be using Photoshop's gradient tool. By keeping our foreground colour set to white and setting the gradient picker to foreground to transparent, we're going to be able to graduate our depth map above and below the train to simulate the same effect that could be achieved by using a tilt and shift lens. So let's move over into the toolbox, select the gradient tool and set it up correctly. Move down towards the bottom of the toolbox and make sure that your foreground colour is set to white. And then you need to move up into the options bar and just click on the gradient picker and make sure that it is set to foreground to transparent. Moving further across in the options bar, make sure the gradient tool is set to linear gradient, the mode is set to normal, and the opacity is set to 100%. Both the dither and the transparency boxes should both be ticked, but the reverse box should remain unticked. With the gradient tool correctly set up in the toolbox and in the options bar, we need to draw a steep diagonal gradient line from the roof of this green train over on the right hand side down towards the shrub that lies just beneath it. By drawing this diagonal gradient line, the original colour should now run parallel to this high-speed East Coast train. Taking a quick glance at the focus point channel in the channels palette, we can see that it's now filled with white and black. Anywhere that's black in the channel thumbnail will remain in focus, compared with any white areas which will be blurred when we apply the lens blur. With the gradient tool still selected from the toolbox, we need to draw another steep gradient line, upwards this time, from the first set of rails towards the front of this high-speed train. Once you've drawn both of your gradient lines, your focus point channel should look rather like mine, and you'll be able to see that the red mask is still visible on your image, and it's following the diagonal path of the train. The great thing about using a depth map is that you have fantastic control over deciding what you want to be in focus and what you want to be out of focus. In this example image, I'd quite like this green train behind the high-speed train to drop out of focus, and that's exactly what I'm going to do now by using the brush tool. Zoom into the image by hitting Ctrl and plus a few times on the keyboard, and then just hold down on the spacebar just to move through the image. Go back over into the toolbox and this time select the brush tool, moving down towards the bottom, and check that your foreground colour is set to white. Going up into the options bar, set a soft brush with a brush size of around 150 pixels, before making sure the mode's set to normal and the opacity is set to around 50%. Carefully paint over this green train with the brush tool, and you'll notice how you're returning it to full colour. This will mean that it'll be blurred once the lens blur is applied. Once you've returned that green train back to full colour, you can just zoom back out again by hitting Ctrl and minus a few times on the keyboard, and we can now apply the lens blur using our depth map. Before we go up to filter, down to blur and onto lens blur, it's very important that we just go back into our channels palette and select the RGB channel first. Now we can go up to filter, down to blur, and then across and down to lens blur. When the lens blur dialog box opens up, you'll notice that the whole image has been affected by the lens blur. But don't worry too much, as we need to specify our depth map. Move over towards the right hand side and click on the source downwards arrow before selecting the focus point depth map. Leave the blur focal distance set to 0, and then moving down underneath the iris, we want to change the iris shape from hexagon to heptagon. Now we need to set the radius to a value of 40 before moving down and setting the blade curvature to a value of 20 and setting the rotation to a value of 45. Under the specular highlights, set the brightness slider to a value of 1 and then set the threshold to a value of 120. On this occasion, we're going to leave the noise amount slider set to 0, and then once you've inputted all of these values in the lens blur, you can move up to the top and hit OK. So with the lens blur effect applied to our image using the depth map, we can now remove the red mask from the image by going into the channels palette and turning off the focus point channel visibility. To give our image the plastic toy-like look, we're going to add a diffuse glow, and to do that we need to go back into our layers palette before going up to layer in the menu bar and then down to duplicate layer. Rename this new duplicate layer diffuse glow and then hit OK, and that new duplicate layer will arrive in your layers palette. Just before we apply the diffuse glow to our new diffuse glow layer, just go across into the toolbox and make sure that your foreground colour is set to black. Then you can move up to filter in the menu bar, go down to distort and move across and click on diffuse glow. As soon as the diffuse glow dialog box loads up, you can just input a graininess value of 0, a glow amount of 9 and a clear amount of 11. Once you've inputted these, just go up and hit OK to apply the diffuse glow to the entire image. Now at the moment the diffuse glow effect is a little bit heavy, so what we're going to do is we're going to paint back some of the original detail using a layer mask. So just go into your layers palette, make sure that you're selected on your diffuse glow layer before going down to the bottom and then clicking on the add layer mask icon. This has bolted a layer mask alongside your diffuse glow layer thumbnail in the layers palette. Move across into the toolbox and pick out the brush tool before making sure your foreground colour is set to black, and then move up to the options bar and set a brush size of around 300 pixels, make sure it's quite a soft brush, make sure the mode is set to normal and just reduce the opacity very slightly down to around 90 or 95%. Double check you're selected on your layer mask thumbnail in the layers palette before very simply just brushing back the original colour, with exception to the railway tracks in the foreground. This is going to take me a few minutes to do, So what I'll do is I'll just continue working through the image and I'll rejoin you in a few moments. And this is the effect after applying the diffuse glow and then painting back the original colour with my layer mask. The last step just involves boosting the overall contrast of our image using curves. So just go up to Layer, down to New Adjustment Layer, across and onto Curves. When this new dialog box pops up, just hit OK and the curves will load onto your screen. Make 2 points with a gap in between them, before dragging the first point down very slightly just to darken the shadows, and then just push the other point up just to lighten the highlights. Once you've done that, you can just go up and hit OK. With all of that hard work completed, it's very important that we save our image. So just go up to File and down to Save As. Choose the location to save your image, and I've given mine a new file name, trainminiature.psd, and I'm saving it as a Photoshop file, meaning I can come back to my layers and make further adjustments should I need to. Once you've inputted your new file name, just go across and hit on Save. And this is the final image after creating our depth map and using the lens blur filter. We've effectively blurred the foreground and the background whilst retaining the plane of focus through the main subject in the image, in this case the train. The technique has absolutely transformed our start image, as we can see by turning off the layers that we've created in the Layers palette and then turning them back on again. Don't forget that this lens blur technique is really well suited to any images that have been taken from a high viewpoint. So if you have any such images, be sure to load them up into Photoshop and try out this technique for yourself. Remember that the plane of focus doesn't always need to be diagonal, as in this case. A lot of it depends on where you want the focus to be, so make sure that you create your depth map to suit your image. I hope you've enjoyed this video, which has looked at a more creative way of using Photoshop's lens blur filter, and I look forward to bringing you another digital photo video very soon.